Next store, we have the latest on the places where COVID-19 has been detected in Toronto. Toronto Public Health is investigating 2 cases of COVID-19 at Yorkdale Mall. That's not the only shopping center that has reported cases. Sherway Gardens is also affected. Kelda Yoon is live at Yorkdale for us tonight. And Kelda, what more can you tell us about these cases?
Well, Chris, here at Yorkdale, both the restaurant, Joey's, as well as the Foot Locker inside the mall, they have both reported 1 case of COVID each. Now, Toronto Public Health say that they are working with both places to ensure that there is no further spread and that everyone is safe. Now, it also says the 2 cases and their close contacts, they're being advised to self-isolate for 14 days. As for casual contacts, they don't have to self-isolate, but they are asked to self-monitor. Now, Joey Yorkdale also released a statement to CBC saying that we can confirm this is an isolated case where the individual contracted it away from the restaurant. 0 transmission has been detected due to extensive safety protocols in place. It also said the affected person was at Joey's on August 27th. Now on August 29th, Joey's restaurant, it did shut down for a thorough deep clean, and it has since reopened. Now, meanwhile, Sherway Gardens, they are also reporting 2 cases, one at the Keg and another one also at the Joey's restaurant at Sherway. And in its statement, it said Sherway says the affected clients acted quickly by contacting Cadillac Fairview, which owns Sherway, and Public Health. The clients and Cadillac Fairview have taken necessary actions as advised by Public Health by arranging a deep clean of the client's space. Both those places, both those restaurants have now since reopened. Now, the question, of course, is if you were one of those people who were inside the Foot Locker here at Yorkdale or inside these restaurants, Joey's here at Yorkdale and the Keg and Joey's at Sherway, should you be concerned? Now, I did speak to an infectious disease specialist. Her name is Dr. Anna Banerjee, and she says the risk is actually very, very low. She says her advice is simply to self-monitor, and if you do notice some symptoms, then you should get tested. Here's what she had to say to me earlier.
So randomly, like unless it's someone they were close to and spent some time with, you know, someone being in a store where maybe there was someone positive, you know, it's unlikely to be very infectious. You go out, do the physical distancing, wear a mask, use hand sanitizer. That's all we can do. You know, there are thousands of people who are in malls every day, and we're not having thousands of cases of COVID related to one person in a mall. So we have to keep things in perspective.
Now, as for the shoppers here today, their reaction was a little bit mixed. Some have concerns, others not so much. Take a listen.
No, I'm off in the mall to the Ritz here with my wife there.
But,
yeah.
But you're not worried about catching COVID?
I'm going to grab my mask here right now.
Oh, okay. So you're taking sensible precautions?
Oh yeah, I do as much as I can to help to make sure that I don't, you know, because I'm not a believer of orthodox medicine, so I don't want to get involved with that stuff, man.
We didn't know about that.
Okay, yeah, there's been 1 case among the staff at Joey and 1 in the Foot Locker.
When was that?
Oh, just today.
Oh.
Or yesterday, sorry, they're reopening today.
Oh, I see. Do you want to go? If you don't want to go, we don't have to.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, thanks for letting us know.
Now, Dr. Banerjee did say that there will be these little pockets of COVID that will continue as the province, as the city continues to reopen. And it says that unless there is a significant outbreak, she doesn't see there to be a need to shut down places again, like the mall, like restaurants, like retail stores. She says as long as people, and she says this is very important, as long as people are following the rules, such as wearing their mask, keeping the social distance, there shouldn't be any significant outbreak, and there shouldn't be any major worries in terms of if you're going to the mall and you pass by someone who may or may not have it. So the risk of catching it that way, she said, is very, very minimal. Chris.
All right, well, that is reassuring. Thanks for this tonight, Kelda. The Toronto District School Board has released its schedule for when elementary students will go back to school in their staggered start. And parents, Get ready. The board put out this chart today. It may look confusing, but it breaks the start date by which type of school your child goes to. There are different dates for schools that go up to grade 5, schools that go up to grade 6, or grade 8, middle schools with 3 grades and middle schools with just grade 7 and 8. For example, if your student is in grade 4 at a kindergarten to grade 6 school, their first day is Thursday, September 17th. Meanwhile, Premier Ford and Education Minister Stephen Lecce got a personal tour of a Toronto elementary school today. They, as well as some of Ontario's top doctors, were at Kensington Community School this morning, taking in some socially distanced classroom models. Afterwards, Ford and Lecce had nothing but good things to say about the staff there and how the school was ready to welcome back students.
I have to thank the principal, Mr. Shepard. You talk about a gentleman that grabbed the bull by the horns. He's ready. He actually told me he's excited about the kids coming back to see him. But this is the attitude that I've been talking about, the can-do attitude. We're going to get through it.
Minister Lecce, come on in.
Mr. Fisher, how are you?
Very good. How are you feeling today?
Feel great.
Great. Did you talk to your family this morning and you've done a self-check at home?
I have.
Okay, wonderful. I see you have your mask, so I'm going to invite you to clean your hands, please.
We literally were treated like a student at the front door, hand sanitizer, asked a series of questions. I mean, that process, I think, builds confidence. And I think as parents get to see that virtually, if you will, I think it'll also give confidence to you that all these caring adults in our schools are 100% committed to the safety of your child.
Meanwhile, Ontario teachers were also learning today. They are now going over documentation from their boards about preparing for the new school year amid a pandemic.
It's significantly more than just one day of training. Again, we've been living this lifestyle now for several months as a society. So it's taking some of those skills and transferring them into a school setting with the training, with the PPE, and again, walking them through. And that's why they have not just the one day, but they'll be educating the students as to how this is going to work.
In the guide from the Greater Essex County School Board, there are 14 layers of COVID-19 safety involving things like the proper use of masks and how to clean a face shield. However, the information some teachers and other boards are reading are still raising some questions.
A few slides in these slideshows that I know have raised concerns among my colleagues and certainly made my eyebrows go up. So, for example, there's repeated insistence on ensuring a minimum of 2 meters of physical distance between people. And yet the conditions under which we're being sent back to work are frequently going to prohibit our ability from doing that.
The Ontario Secondary School Teachers Federation says the training itself should be more interactive. Health and safety experts for the school boards say everyone needs to stay flexible. And we are looking for parents, teachers, and students who can help us cover back to school this September. We have a form on our website, cbc.ca/Toronto, where you can share how things are going at your school. We'll monitor the responses and follow up where we can. Meanwhile, the Ontario Liberal Party has launched a new website looking for complaints from people about their school conditions.
Stories about what's both working and what's not working. Stories about safety, potential safety failures, and confusion because of the lack of funding, planning, and leadership from Queen's Park. Stories about how our educators, caretakers, bus drivers, and support staff have stepped up, as they always do, to help make the transition back to school better, because Doug Ford has been missing in action.
The website, called Keep Our Schools Safe, allows teachers, students, and staff to describe what their experience is like returning to school in a COVID world. You can write the story out or send them a video. The Liberals hope this puts pressure on the province to improve their school plans and make sure the process is done in a safe way. Starting today, childcare centers and before and after school programs are allowed to run at full capacity again. But even with restrictions, one childcare owner says he's only about 1/3 full.
So we are licensed for over 70, and at this time we are operating obviously much below capacity. So I would say in the neighborhood of about 30%. So that's the ongoing challenge for us right now. So we have like 5 classrooms, but just 3 of them are operational right now because of the low enrollments.
So previously they'd been limited to 15 kids. Now as many as 24 preschoolers and 30 school-age children will be allowed in a cohort. Staff must wear masks at all times and everyone will be screened before entering the facility. The centers have also put extra cleaning protocols in place. A new study suggests that cycling along the Danforth has grown since the installation of new bike lanes. But some business owners east of Broadview say those statistics don't tell the whole story. Greg Ross joins us live now along the Danforth. And Greg, those lanes were installed earlier this summer.
Yeah, they were, and it's really changed the landscape here on the Danforth. I mean, just take a look right beside me here. You can see they've now installed these bike lanes right against the curb, and they've moved parking away from the curb and reduced it in some areas, but it has made it a lot safer for cyclists. As you can see, they're protected by these cars, or at least a concrete barrier in most areas from live traffic. But whether or not this change has been good for business in the area, well, that still remains to be seen. This joint study by the David Suzuki Foundation and Cycle Toronto compared data from a 24-hour period in 2018 before the bike lanes were installed on the Danforth and a 24-hour period earlier this month.
There's been about a 40% increase.
Gideon Foreman is a transportation policy analyst with the David Suzuki Foundation. He says using a camera, they counted the total number of cyclists, which he says jumped from 3,000 before the bike lanes to well over 4,000 after.
Because when you put in safe cycling infrastructure, people use it. They feel safe to ride a bike.
Cyclists are much safer now that they have a row of parked cars or concrete barriers between them and live traffic, which makes it far more difficult for something like this to happen. Those who are regular cyclists along the Danforth say they've noticed a huge difference, especially on stress levels.
There was cars, and there were cars opening doors all the time, and there were people jogging in and out of the cars to cross the street, so you really had to be alert. Now you get in this lane and you can, I don't want to say you don't have to be alert, but you can relax a little.
But stress levels have increased for many drivers on the Danforth now that it's been reduced from 4 lanes of traffic to just 2. Have you noticed a difference in traffic since the bike lanes have gone in?
Definitely. It's certainly more congested when you're down to a single lane going in either direction.
It's nowhere to park now. It's just those small places.
And many business owners say the lack of parking has hurt business.
We've lost probably somewhere in the neighborhood of 70% of our parking, and green pea is just simply not enough.
Craig Abbott owns the Lewis Cipher Brew Works. He says a big part of his business is retail beer sales.
People would run in quick, do their retail purchase and leave. We just don't have that hit and run traffic anymore.
Not enough parking.
There's just not enough parking, so people just drive by now.
Point to some studies that they've done along Bloor Street where they have similar bike lanes to the ones that they have here, where they say that the cycling traffic has helped business in those areas. He also hopes that the success that they've had on Bloor Street and here along the Danforth will lead to the city actually installing more bike lanes, particularly, Chris, in the north-south corridor. He would like to see them directly on Yonge Street, the main artery right into the city.
And we're getting a look at some of the traction on that bike lane behind you right now. Thanks, Greg. Meanwhile, a young cyclist has been killed after a collision in Mississauga near Dixie and Dundas.
The driver did remain on scene and is cooperating with police. We have recently learned that the cyclist was a male youth under the age of 18.
Police say the teen was struck by a transport truck while riding his bike on Dixie. He was pronounced dead at the scene. Police are investigating and are asking anyone with information to come forward. Now, is a selfie worth the risk? That's what Metrolinx is asking after a sharp increase in dangerous behavior around GO train tracks and crossings since the pandemic. Marivelle Tarouk spoke with Anne-Marie Akins of Metrolinx about the alarming incidents and what the transit agency is doing to curb them.
We've always seen risk takers and incidents on our tracks, unfortunately. But since March, since the pandemic really kicked up, we've seen a really steep increase in the number of incidents. Whether it's for selfies for social media or videos with new TikTok, now we're seeing many more videos that people are making on tracks. But I think COVID in and of itself made people eager to get out and do something or take risks or just looking for something to do. And so we've seen this huge increase.
Have you been able to quantify how much more of an increase you've seen in these kinds of incidents since the pandemic?
No, but a large increase. One of the bridges over top of a river that our trains go over, it's not a walking bridge, it's not only meant for our trains. We've had 100 incidents since March of people jumping off of it into the river. We've had to stop and warn people, scold people, we fine people, even take them into custody. So it's against the law to do it, and it's such a huge risk. Trains can come at any time, and you are stuck on a bridge.
If you could just explain, you've said it's illegal, first of all, we can establish that, but what are some of the penalties people face who engage in this behavior?
Well, the least of which is a fine, which is $100 to $5,000. That's the least of which. The biggest penalty will, if you get hit by a train, you will not survive it, and we will have to go to your family during a pandemic already where people are upset, stressed, lost their jobs, already under a lot of stress, and tell them the worst news of their lives, which is that they just lost a loved one unnecessarily by taking a risk with the trains. And you know, we had an incident over the weekend on the Niagara train, which our crew had to come to an emergency stop because they saw a husband, a wife, and their 2 little children crossing a bridge. They came to an emergency stop, they went for a full-on run, and they got out of it just in time.
What would that be if you had to sort of make one very strong point to people thinking about doing this?
You don't want to do something that will hurt your family for the rest of their lives. It will change the course of their lives if we have to go and tell them that you died by being hit by a train. It's just not worth it.
Fortunately, there were no injuries after a 12-year-old boy took his family's car for a joyride overnight. Police started getting calls about a possible impaired driver around 1:30 this morning. This after a Hyundai SUV was spotted being driven erratically near Albion and Islington. The OPP finally pulled the young driver over on the QEW near Mississauga Road, and the boy's father arrived at the scene to take him home. No one was hurt, and there's no indication from police of any charges. Time now to get Colette Kennedy in the mix here. And yesterday you were telling me it was going to be hot, it was going to be humid, and boy, did the weather deliver.
Yes, it certainly has. Wow, we've seen those humidex values come back into play. Such a change from yesterday. The current temperatures, they look like this. St. Catharines, we're rounding this up to 28. The actual temperature, 27.5. That is actually the hot spot in Ontario. But you know what? Earlier today, Toronto, we were at 27.4. So you have us barely by just a tenth of a temperature there. And you know what? A tenth of a degree. The winds have come around just to the southeast, so just getting that breeze. And that's what's kind of knocked the temperature off a few degrees right now into Toronto and Oshawa. But look at the humidex values. They're up there and, in fact, feeling like the mid-30s. And we're going to be having this for a couple of days yet, even though we have a frontal boundary that's coming in. So we have dry conditions for now, and we're still going to be seeing this as we go into the evening hours. Later tonight, though, that's not going to be the case. So here's that boundary coming in. Some of the heavier rains, those are going to be around the Bruce Peninsula. We'll see this around Georgian Bay as well towards Parry Sound. But still, through the overnight as we get closer towards midnight and through towards about 5, 6 a.m., we'll have some heavier downpours coming closer towards the GTA. And even as we go through the morning towards the early afternoon, some scattered showers and thunderstorms, still that potential will be there. And then we'll get clearing out as we go towards the later afternoon and tomorrow evening. But overnight tonight, 20 for your low, 27 feeling like the mid-30s tomorrow. And we do have a special weather statement to the north of us. I'll show you that when I come back, Chris.
All right, sounds good. Thanks, Colette.
You got it.
The weather is brought to you by Trane, the most reliable heating and cooling brand. We test, so it runs. It's hard to stop a train.
U.S. President Donald Trump waded into the middle of an American civil unrest hot zone today, traveling to Kenosha, Wisconsin. That's where a black man, Jacob Blake, was shot in the back 7 times by a police officer, triggering days of violent protests. As Susan Ormiston reports, Trump's visit is part of his election strategy in a key battleground state.
Over objections from Kenosha's mayor and the governor, the president came anyway, pressing his law and order message in a city just beginning to recover.
The violence has stopped from the time the National Guard came. I mean, literally, when they set their foot on this location, it stopped.
Hundreds came out to see the president. Black Lives Matter protesters joining in with supporters at an intersection, trading chants. Amongst his fans, people said they were glad that Trump was here.
To show the people that we're going to have to take up militia anyways, that he's got our back. You know, that, the other side, we're not just going to stand and let somebody burn down our city.
Then Trump came right down here to clear evidence of the worst of the violence and looting just over a week ago, to a burned out business here in downtown Kenosha. Clearly gathering images of him talking about law and order. He did not meet the Blake family, who said they had no interest in becoming a political prop.
If the President of the United States, if he loves chaos, we are not going to create the backdrop for the violent chaos he wants to see.
Instead, they staged a community event near where Jacob Blake was shot 7 times in the back.
I don't think it's helpful. We're going to bounce back, but let us bounce back on our own.
The National Guard is still very much on patrol here, and there is a dusk to dawn curfew. The scars, even after the president leaves, will take a long time to heal, and just under the surface, tensions are still raw. And Wisconsin, after all, is a key electoral prize in this November's election. That's ultimately why Trump was here and why Joe Biden is considering a trip to Kenosha too. Susan Ormiston, CBC News, Kenosha, Wisconsin.
When we return, was last week's show of support for Black lives from white NHL players the real deal?
This was an authentic moment where our guys were able to share, so players, the white players could empathize, and then ask for first of all, thanks for sharing, guys, and then it was like, well, what do we do to help?
Welcome back. The pandemic has kept many people separated from their loved ones, among them professional athletes who've been living in their league bubbles for months now. But yesterday, there was a heartwarming reunion for one of the Toronto Raptors' biggest stars. Oh.
Who's that? Oh, so sweet.
That is very, very sweet. And that is point guard Freddie VanVleet reuniting with his family for the first time since June. And clearly he and his children, 2-year-old Sana and 1-year-old Fred Jr., were overjoyed to be back together. The touching scene was recorded and shared on social media by VanVleet's partner and high school sweetheart, Shantae Neal. Yesterday, the NBA began allowing players to bring in select family members to stay with them at Walt Disney World in Orlando.
VanVleet fires it free. Fred Jr. Fred Jr. is in the bubble.
Boost he needed, but his dad is on fire. Game 2 of the Raptors and Celtics series is underway after sweeping the first series. Toronto lost to Boston by 18 points on Sunday. The team is hoping to take Game 2 tonight to tie the series at 1-1. And so far, it's been a tight game. The Celtics are leading 35-34. Now, this is an unprecedented moment in professional sports, with players protesting against anti-black racism and police brutality. The Hockey Diversity Alliance, also known as HDA, is an initiative led by black NHL players that was instrumental in getting the NHL to pause play last week. Chris George is the head of the advisory board for the Alliance. He played in the OHL many years ago and endured racism playing hockey himself. I spoke with him earlier today at the Hockey Hall of Fame. When we look around the Hockey Hall of Fame, we see so few black faces, just like the league itself. Willie O'Ree, for example, he played in the NHL, first black player more than 60 years ago, only inducted into the Hockey Hall of Fame just 2 years ago. What does all of this say to you about systemic racism in the league?
Good question. It says that we have a lot of work to do. I think there's a lot of people who want to be a part of that. And at the Hockey Diversity Alliance, we've got a plan to hopefully instill a sustainable change.
I want to get into your personal story a little bit too. Take me back to London, Ontario, right after a game when you experienced violent racism.
So the details on that one, I was literally got dropped by a taxi cab and crossing the road, like just to my apartment, and a biker gang kind of pulled up, and one guy jumped out and called me an effing N-word and just hit me with brass knuckles, and I went down and he kicked me on the ground, and it was quite violent. When I reflect back on that moment as a father now, 25 odd years later, it really resonates that with all of that happening, my biggest concern as a 20-year-old man in that moment was, how would that impact me and the hockey team, right? Like I literally couldn't put my hockey helmet on.
Wow.
Because of stitches and swelling. We kind of hushed it up. We didn't tell the news. We didn't tell the cops. And there I was in this moment, worried about, being that black troublemaker on the hockey team who was causing trouble. And I don't think that's right.
Fast forward to last week. We had this pause across sports leagues, the NHL included. And then I know you got a chance to actually have some one-on-one time with players in this info session where you were talking to white players about racism. What was it that you were saying to them?
The players reached out to our HDA hockey players from inside this bubble, which again is part of this moment that makes it so unique and puts so much pressure on it, to be honest. So they reach out to our players asking for advice and requested like a BLM 101 info session. They truly took the boycott moment to reflect and learn. 96% are white, right? So it's a different situation and dynamic than the NBA players. We had our boys, our HDA players, explain some of their situations that helped tie, the American situation to bring it a little closer to hockey. Right. Joel Ward tells his story about being in Boston and all the hate, the death threats he received for scoring a goal, right? So guys kind of went through all these intimate stories to their brothers in the bubble, and then it was funny. Like, guys just started leaning in, right? It's Zoom again, right? So they're leaning in. They're like, guys, like, what can we do? I think that's also a beauty of the moment that we're in. Bigger than hockey is you have, for the first time probably in forever, you have white people that are looking and listening and wanting to learn.
Why is it so important to have white players involved in leading this?
Yeah, I mean, there's only so much that we can do alone. This time, when you look at the people protesting, it's the white kids, it's the generation that's next that's really just said, this is ridiculous. We're not going to treat our people like this and our friends. Thank you for letting us know what's happening, and the empathy is what is now driving, I think, that's something that's going to be able to have enough fuel to have sustainable change, right? And that's where I think I'm proud of what we're doing at the Hockey Diversity Alliance. We're making sure that this is a movement and not a moment. We have an action plan in place to offer our support and hold the NHL accountable, not only at the top of the house, but where our guys want to do a ton of work is in the grassroots level. Engage a different demographic. To do that, again, you kind of got to make hockey cool again in certain groups. And then you also, I mean, hockey's a tough sport. I mean, if you're familiar with the GTHL, it's not cheap. Access is tough. Like, there's a lot of logistics that we have to spend years, like decades, figuring out how to piece it all together. And we're looking forward to doing that work.
All right, coming up, it has been a quarter century since the conviction of Paul Bernardo. When we come back, one of the people who declared him guilty is pushing for more supports from jurors.
We're not talking about compensation. We're just talking about providing for people's basic expenses. And the fact that the face of a jury will never change if the only people you see on juries are people who work for large corporations that continue to pay them, or senior citizens who might have the time and are getting a pension.
25 years after the conviction of one of Canada's most notorious murderers, a member of the jury that convicted Paul Bernardo is calling on governments to do more to support jury members. It's not just about money, but about their mental health after traumatizing cases. Natalie Collada explains.
My name is Tina Danzer.
Standing outside the same courthouse where she served on the Paul Bernardo jury, Tina Danzer makes a plea.
On this day, each and one of you, if you could please think about the Mahaffey and French families and how their hearts have been broken by the evil that this man has committed, because I think of them every day.
She and others from the Canadian Juries Commission are today calling on federal and provincial governments to offer jurors more access to emotional and financial support.
It improves diversity and representation on jury panels by removing an income and financial barrier that has existed for decades.
They're asking the federal and provincial government to pay jurors $120 a day instead of the current $40, cover daycare and family care costs, parking, and offer extended access to emotional supports and therapy.
We're not talking about compensation. We're just talking about providing for people's basic expenses. And the fact that the face of a jury will never change if the only people you see on juries are people who work for large corporations that continue to pay them, or senior citizens who might have the time and are getting a pension.
In a February report, the House of Commons Standing Committee on Finance called on the federal government to provide $20 million in funding over 10 years to the Canadian Juries Commission to support juror mental health. The Ontario government offers some mental health supports to jurors, but the group wants it extended.
Jury duty should not be available only to those who can afford it. That is not our democracy.
The federal and provincial governments have not responded to our requests for comment. Natalie Collada, CBC News, Toronto.
Police are looking for at least 2 suspects after a shooting early this morning in Scarborough. Investigators say one of the bullets entered an apartment with 3 children inside, which prompted some strong words from a Toronto police duty inspector.
We see a lot of these shootings in these types of neighborhoods and high residential apartment buildings. Is the 99% of the people here that are good people that are scared and many times held hostage by these gunmen who are here just shooting indiscriminately.
Fortunately, no one in the unit was hurt, but a 20-year-old man that police believe was the intended target was shot in the leg. They say he was approached while in the parking lot of 80 Mornell Court near Military Trail and Morningside Avenue. The victim's injuries are serious but not life-threatening. Investigators say at least 2 male suspects took off in a black 2015 Cadillac Escalade. And we have new details tonight about yesterday's shooting at a Brampton cemetery. It happened just before 4 p.m. inside the cemetery grounds near Beauverde and Chinguacousy Road. One of the victims was found collapsed in a neighborhood across the street from the cemetery. About 10 minutes later, police got word that another victim had turned up at a fire hall about a 15-minute drive away. Both men suffered critical injuries. Then, about a half hour later, a third victim showed up at Brampton Civic Hospital. We spoke with a man who witnessed paramedics treating one of the victims.
He was just holding his neck, right? And they just, when officers and paramedics put him into the ambulance and they just took him to the hospital.
Now, investigators believe all 3 victims were shot at the cemetery, and they are looking for 2 suspect vehicles, a Mercedes and a light-colored Honda. Since the pandemic began, Dr. David Williams has been front and center, one of the key people providing regular updates on COVID-19. But tonight, there are calls for Dr. Williams to step down. Lorenda Redekop now on what's prompting the push for a new top doctor in Ontario.
We need the chief medical officer of health that can lead this province into the second wave of COVID-19. And we do not, at this point, have the right leadership.
The head of the Registered Nurses Union not holding back. Online, she's already called for Dr. David Williams to resign. She has the support of this epidemiologist. Both say other health professionals agree but won't speak up. Their latest issue? Williams downplaying the COVID risk for teachers at school, comparing it to COVID in healthcare workers.
Where they look like they got on the job, we often find that they got it back in the community.
He said often infections were due to being careless away from the workplace.
It's when they interview and they say later, I said, I guess I got casual in that event. I didn't think it was a real issue.
Doris Grinspan questions in how many cases that's true and sees it as an insult to the thousands of healthcare workers who got the virus, particularly in long-term care homes. Today, both the Premier and Health Minister gave Williams the thumbs up.
Well, I have all the confidence in the world in Dr. Williams and his whole entire team. And it's not just one doctor making a decision, it's multiple doctors around the table.
I have full confidence in Dr. Williams and the work that he's been doing. He's done his best to keep Ontarians safe.
And despite more than a month of leading Ontario through stage 3 of reopenings, cases haven't drastically gone up, unlike the increases in some provinces. Grinspan says the Premier already knows how she feels.
How urgent do you see this as?
Immediately. It's long past 2. Ideally, the Premier should have taken my advice months ago.
Her worry now is with schools heading back without physical distancing and concerns about a second wave. Lorenda Redekop, CBC News, Toronto.
The statue of Sir John A. Macdonald outside Queen's Park remains boarded up today, months after it was splashed with paint in protest. Over the weekend, a statue of Canada's first Prime Minister was pulled down in Montreal. Macdonald is one of the architects of the residential school system, and today, Ottawa is officially recognizing the residential school era as a tragedy. Olivia Stefanovic explains the significance.
More than half a century since attending the Shubenacadie Residential School in Nova Scotia, Doreen Bernard is still trying to heal.
We were taught not to talk, not to speak. And we were punished if we spoke or if we got out of line.
Bernard says she was separated from her family, beaten and stripped of her culture. Painful memories Bernard doesn't want anyone to ever forget.
I think it's really important that the site is marked so that the history can be taught and learned.
Today, the federal government took a step to make that a reality.
From this day forward, the residential school system will be designated as an event of national historic significance, which will help to educate all Canadians on the system and its consequences, and ensure this part of our history is never forgotten or repeated.
Ottawa also designated the Shubenacadie Residential School as a National Historic Site, along with the Portage La Prairie Residential School in Manitoba, after those communities nominated the former schools for preservation.
No matter what Canada has tried to do with their policies, their legislation, our people have risen above that and are resilient, and we are strong, and we are gaining strength.
Other residential school sites can be added to the list, but it's up to individual communities.
We can never forget, and these designations help ensure that we never will.
And by remembering, laying the foundation for a new relationship based on this painful but shared history. Olivia Stefanovic, CBC News, Ottawa.
Now to an update on the concerns surrounding Governor General Julie Payette. The federal government has hired a private consulting firm to help them look into accusations that Payette and her second-in-command have verbally abused staff at Rideau Hall. Evan Dyer has the details.
It was back on July 23rd that the government initially announced that there would be some kind of an investigation into the claims of harassment and bullying at Rideau Hall by the Governor General, by her secretary, Assunta Di Lorenzo. Now we see that a consulting firm based in Ottawa, Quintet Consulting, has been named to carry out that investigation, that administrative review. This is a firm that's done a lot of work for the federal government in issues of harassment and respect in the workplace, typically getting at least a few contracts every year. It's been involved in some fairly high-profile cases, including the case of Senator Dawn Meredith, who was ultimately forced to resign from the Canadian Senate after admitting to having a relationship with a teenage girl. So Quintet Consulting now has a mandate to speak to current and former staffers at Rideau Hall. Some of them have alleged that there's been a very toxic climate in that workplace since Julie Payette became Governor General. A lot of bullying, a lot of yelling in meetings, belittling of people, belittling of their work. One former staffer referred to every meeting having to have its victims. So Quintet Consulting will now interview everybody involved, including presumably the people who are alleged to have been the bullies in this matter, Julie Payette and her secretary, and then we'll deliver a report later this fall to Dominic LeBlanc, that is chair of the Privy Council, who of course is himself the son of a Governor General. Evan Dyer, CBC News, Chelsea, Quebec.
Let's get back to Colette Kennedy now. And Colette, is it too early to start talking about the weekend?
I don't think it is. When it's a holiday weekend, I think you can start a couple of weeks in advance, Chris.
All right, let's go.
Yeah, and here we are. It's the first day of September, so also I thought we'd just kind of take a look at what to anticipate for the month ahead when we talk about the weather. And really, we take kind of a 30 years and look at the averages. So average daytime high, and again, this is looking at the whole month. So obviously, at the beginning of the month, they're going to be warmer than the end of the month, but it comes out to about 21.6 daytime low, typically in the overnight hours, just about 11 degrees, and rainfall for the month of September usually comes in somewhere around 75 millimeters. So just to give you an overview there, these are our current temperatures: 24 degrees in Toronto and Oshawa, Hamilton at 26, still warmer there at St. Catharines, coming in at 28, and the humidity went up today, so we've got low 30s to mid 30s for those humidex values. A system that's coming in that's going to really start kicking up those winds from the southwest, so they'll become gusty in the overnight hours and a little breezier through the day tomorrow as well. Some of the heavier rains, as this is kind of pulling towards the northeast, those are going to come in towards the Bruce Peninsula and up around Georgian Bay towards Parry Sound and through Huntsville and Port Carling. So that's really where the special weather statement is in place for areas that are going to pick up more than 50 millimeters of rain through kind of that 8 p.m. to tomorrow around noon through that corridor. So that's where the heaviest stuff is going to be. You can see I've stopped this at 1:30 in the morning. You can see some of those downpours with the embedded thunderstorms. Towards the GTA, though, we're going to pick up some rainfalls through the overnight hours as well. Most of it, the heaviest stuff, should stop, though, by 5 or 6. That doesn't mean it'll be over with. We'll still have some scattered showers and thunderstorms in the early morning hours. Lighter scattered stuff early afternoon returns, and that front clears out, and then we clear out in the later afternoon into the evening hours, and things will improve. Still hot and humid until we get the next front. That one's going to come through late on Thursday, a few light showers, but it dries us out for Friday, so it's going to feel more comfortable into the weekend. But tomorrow, not comfortable, still sticky, 27, feeling like the mid-30s with that humidex. And there you are, still hot into Thursday, more comfortable for your holiday that you're already thinking about the weekend, Chris.
I'm sure I'm not the only one.
Oh, I don't think you are.
Thanks, Colette.
You're welcome.
I'm Ismail Alpha, host of Metro Morning. On tomorrow's show, we take you to one of the neighborhoods with the highest numbers of COVID-19 and speak with single parents about the choices they're wrestling with and the steps they're taking to keep their families safe as kids go back to school. Join me weekdays from 5:30 till 8:30 for Metro Morning on CBC Radio 1.
Alberta is putting its back-to-school pandemic plan to the test this week.
It's a little uncomfortable. I could barely even breathe in it, sadly.
And are you nervous about having to wear it all day today?
No, not really. It's for our own safety, so.
This has been day one for students in Calgary. Adding to the expected anxiety among parents and teachers is the province's shifting message on physical distancing, specifically a decision on the weekend to drop the rules around distancing in the classroom. Shannon Scott has reaction.
It's interesting how this is being interpreted.
Dr. Dina Hinshaw faced many questions about Public Health Order 33. Its release over the weekend caused a stir among parents and educators worried about what it means for students as they head back to class.
We had heard that there was some confusion about the fact that the masking guidance in our school guidance documents articulated that masking was required whenever 2 meters of distancing could not be maintained.
But Hinshaw says that's not the intention of the province's mask policy, and the new order clarifies that. Here's the wording of that new order. An operator of a school does not need to ensure that students, staff members, and visitors are able to maintain a minimum 2 meters distance from every other person when a student, staff member, or visitor is seated at a desk or table. The opposition NDP say the move is simply a way to bring public health orders in line with the government's back-to-school plan, a plan education critic Sarah Hoffman calls insufficient. She says Hinshaw shouldn't be the one facing questions about it.
Jason Kenney needs to stand to account for the decisions that he's making. I think it's also ridiculous that the ministers of education and health aren't attending today's briefing for the media at 3:30. I think they should be there. I think they should own up for the decisions that they're making. I think parents are calling my office constantly, and I'm sure they're calling theirs too. And I think at a minimum, they should stand and account for their decisions instead of trying to brush off their decisions on the public service.
Both Edmonton and Calgary's public boards have said distancing isn't possible in most of their schools, and this order doesn't change anything as kids head back to class. Shannon Scott, CBC News, Calgary.
All right, Colette, so I think I'm getting the message here. I'm going to go home and I'm going to grab the cushions off the balcony. Is that the case
Yes,
for tonight?
That would be a good idea because it's going to be wet tonight, but not only that, we've got windy conditions as the winds are going to be.
Take that umbrella down too then.
Yes,
Okay.
that's a good idea too. You've been listening. Thank you,
Always.
Chris. I know, and I really appreciate that. Something I also want to let our viewers know, and this has just been issued since I was last with you, so we can get this into the show. Environment Canada has issued a severe thunderstorm watch, so conditions are favorable for the development of some severe storms here into southwestern Ontario. So this is in addition to the special weather statement I was telling you about that's up near the Bruce Peninsula and areas like Parry Sound and Huntsville. So if you are traveling from the GTA headed towards southwestern Ontario, do know about this. Windsor, Essex, Chatham, Ken, over towards Elgin, Waterloo, Wellington, through that region, all the way up towards Grey Bruce. This evening, some of these storms that are coming in, they're kind of packing a punch. You can see some of the heavier downpours here back towards Michigan as those are tracking in towards that area. So not only heavy downpours, some small hail, that potential there, and some of these strong wind gusts. Another reason you're going to take that umbrella down, Chris.
Yeah, no, I'm glad I'm listening to you now. Thanks, Colette.
You're welcome.
And that is our show for you tonight. Thank you so much for joining us. You can see me back here tomorrow night at 6. Have a great night.